beautiful day in the neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Come on, everybody, let's sing. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Very good. That was excellent. Give yourselves a hand. Awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, we'll get somebody and say, would you be my neighbor? Excellent. Well, good morning, everyone. Don't worry, I'm not going to break out any weird puppets. I was always kind of afraid of those as well, okay? But we all know where that song came from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Kind of an iconic show that we all know and we all could sing. Probably we've all seen a time or two. Fred Rogers was married to his wife, Joanne, for over 50 years. They had 2 sons together. He was also an ordained Presbyterian minister as well. His mom was the one who sewed all of his sweaters for him. Fred Rogers did not allow marketing and advertising of products targeted at his children on his TV show. He was dead set against that and even called out certain corporations that tried to do that, tried to kind of lure kids in with their stuff. He also had no interest in television, too. He was very unpleased with television, kind of had a disdain for it, but he decided it was the best way to share kindness to children. He was the same person on and off the air. Fred Rogers would wake up every single morning to pray, to write, to exercise, and then to respond to every single one of letters that he got from fans. Every one. He got about 50 to 100 every single day, and he would personally write back to each one. He actually would save all of the kids' drawings that were sent in to him because he said they were his treasure. Fred Rogers transferred out of an Ivy League school to pursue a degree in music. All the songs on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood were written by him, including many more, actually. Much of Fred Rogers' inspiration and perspective was birthed out of his childhood. You see, he was an overweight child and very, very shy. Because of this, he was teased and taunted by a lot of other kids, often on his way home from school. And so when he was home alone, he would often cry, just cry. And eventually, he would say that he learned to cry through his fingers and make up songs on the piano. The theme song, which we just sang together, was his creation. It was an invitation for kids to learn about kindness and feel loved in its reach. The song itself really, though, is an echo of the conversation that many of us know that took place between Jesus and a lawyer. Sounds like a bad joke, Jesus and a lawyer one day, but that's not where I'm going, okay? But the exchange between Jesus and this lawyer led to a question that I think we all are familiar with that kind of came from this conversation. The man asked Jesus, well, who is my neighbor? And of course, Jesus goes on to brilliantly and revolutionarily defy the common understanding of a neighbor of the 21st or of the first century, which was his cultural context. In remarkable fashion, he left everyone speechless as the distance between what a neighbor is in God's definition of the term and what a neighbor is in our practice. You see, our practice is often based on what's comfortable to us. We tend to neighbor those that are kind of convenient to us. The question really is for the 21st century church, kind of a long time ago from that 2,000 years ago when Jesus walked the earth, but today, right here, right now, you and me, the question really is, will we be their neighbor? Today I'd like to talk to you about the incredible importance it is to the heart of God that we be the kind of neighbors that he has shown us to be. Paul echoes the words of Christ in Romans 13:10. He says, love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. How many of us have ever, you don't have to raise your hands, how many of us have ever done wrong to somebody? Even after you come to know Jesus Christ, how many have done some wrong at a time or two? Love is the fulfillment of the law, and love is doing no wrong to somebody. The question that we need to ask ourselves is how is our disposition right now? How is the love that we have, or say that we have, extending beyond us? Do I want to be a neighbor? Do I want to be that kind of neighbor that is kind of that grumpy neighbor that yells at all the kids for walking on his grass? Do I want to be that obnoxious neighbor that doesn't consider what time of night it is and they got the music blaring? Do I want to be that busybody neighbor that needs to know everybody's stuff? Do I want to be that neighbor that ignores everyone else in the neighborhood and wants nothing to do with you? You've been there in the block for 20 years and you still don't know what that person's name is. Or do I want to be that kind of neighbor in the neighborhood of life that God himself has given us, that lends a hand, that cares to know, shares the truth, and wants a relationship? Will I be their neighbor? Will the church, followers of Jesus, minister and help lives that are broken and just hurting, or maybe they're vehemently opposed to the things of God? Will the church, us Christians, bring healing to relationships and ideologies that we do not even agree with? Will the church be the hands and feet of Jesus, providing for the needs of lost people who live in stark contrast to the commandments of Christ? Will the church, saved people, return kindness and goodness in the face of hatred and evil? Or will we be shocked by it? Will the church be their neighbor regardless of whether or not they listen to the message that Christ has given us to give? Will we be their neighbor? Going back to when it all started, the early church in the first century, they weren't really regarded, Christians really weren't regarded as any type of people with influence. Actually, they were considered quite simple and uneducated. They were looked down upon and they were frowned upon. If you really think about it, you can understand why. I mean, who's going to listen to a homeless guy that didn't make it in the carpenter's trade that died on a cross? I mean, that doesn't sound like somebody like that you're going to like, yeah, I'm going to go follow him, right? Yet by the 3rd century AD, Christianity spread to the known parts of the world with great influence in just a couple hundred years. Why? Well, not only because there was a burning conviction to tell of how God, through Jesus Christ, invaded our time and humanity, but there was another reason as well. And practically speaking, it was love in its purest form. Tertullian, he writes about seeing the love of God expressed through Christians. He wrote this: see how these Christians love one another. It was visible to him. Now, Tertullian, he became a church father, but that's not what he was at all the time. No, Tertullian was a Roman centurion who actually indulged in all of the typical Roman licentious ways. Kind of just, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. I mean, he participated in it all. He enjoyed going to the games and the arenas, but he was profoundly impacted by the testimony of Christians who were being martyred there. Why in the world would they go through that? He was radically changed by the witness of these uneducated, unwanted, and unimportant Christians. He was amazed at seeing them take care of the poor, people they didn't even know, how they helped widows and orphans, how they brought kids into their homes when kids were disregarded in society, how they would visit the prisoners, and how they'd have compassion on all people during times of famine, of war, and natural disasters. Of course, he would later go on to defend the faith of Christianity, and he was in large part a key player in seeing the transition of Christianity being a persecuted minority to the majority in the Roman world. He was a huge influence on the early church. He started to write and share the gospel and share the teachings of Jesus Christ, and he actually translated it all into Latin That was kind of he was like the Latin church father. And so he started to communicate in a different language outside of Hebrew and Greek. One ministry during that time that really opened the hearts and the minds of people all around them was the church and how they treated people who had passed away. One ministry that they were a part of quite routinely was that the church would provide services for people who were poor that didn't have means to bury their loved ones. The church did that because the church believed that each person had so much dignity upon their lives because they're made in the image of God, in the likeness of God, that they needed to have a proper burial because back then people couldn't afford it. They were just tossed into pits. They're tossed into wherever. And you could just imagine, there would be dead bodies in different places. It's kind of gross, kind of nasty, kind of unsanitary too. You imagine just the disease and all that. But the church came in and they started to do things differently and started to love people. Simple compassion for the bodies of the dead spoke louder than the cultural norms of that day because they were propelled by the love of God in their life. There was such a mercy that came from the heart of Christians, even to those who opposed them. Does our mercy today outweigh our disdain for people, for culture, for our society? Will we be their neighbor? Will I be their neighbor? Again, what kind of neighbor will we be? A distant neighbor, an annoying neighbor, an angry neighbor, a nosy neighbor, a loud neighbor, a word only, not deed kind of neighbor? Will we, the local church, you and me, will we go beyond the status quo of today's idea of neighbor and be the neighbor that Christ has called us to be, filtered through the greatest commandment of all time, to love God with everything that you have and love your neighbor as yourself? Will I give up my earthly rights to extend heaven's itinerary as our faith in Christ bids us to? One of my favorite verses of Jesus demonstrating this kind of neighbor is found in John 1:14. I love what the Message translation translate this as. It says, "The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood." Love that. We saw the glory with our own eyes, the one-of-a-kind glory, like Father, like Son, generous inside and out, true from start to finish. He moved into the neighborhood called earth. He moved into our world, the visible expression of the invisible God. He became our visual aid as to what this life is all about and how we are to live it. But if the church is just a bunch of words to society today, because you notice that the Word became flesh and blood. The church has to be more than just words to society. We've got to be flesh and blood. We've got to incarnate the gospel of Jesus Christ. We've got to in word and in deed. But if all we do is just in word, guess what we become? Just a bunch of white noise. As a combination of sounds and all different frequencies packaged together, about 20,000 tones, all playing at the same time, of which the human brain cannot put order to. And the church becomes a bunch of different voices talking all at once without anything discernible really being heard by those around us. Jesus moved into the neighborhood called planet Earth, and the example of his neighboring has now echoed for over 2,000 years. His life has impacted healthcare, education, poor and the needy, the marginalized, women, the addict, the sinner, and on in all parts of society. Jesus revolutionized that. He brought that to the table. He says, how are we lifting people up and bringing dignity back to the image of God that he has placed on human beings? Now, I'm not advocating for a social gospel, but I'm advocating for a gospel that has social effects. Undoubtedly, good works do not produce salvation, but good works are a product of salvation. They don't cause salvation, but they are an effect of salvation. When we're saved, it should show in our lives by how we are loving people. James 2:17 says, so also by faith itself, if it does not have works, is dead. I know a lot of people that tell me that they believe in God. That's good. I'm glad for that. But what is your life pointing to? What is your life showing? Does your life show that you're believing in God by the expression of the love of God through your life to actually touch people that might be just a little inconvenient for your situation? Jesus actually judges our lives, as it says in John 15, by its fruit. And the Father is pleased by a life that produces fruitfulness for his kingdom. Not fruitfulness for our own little lives of what we want and what we see and our comforts and what we can do and how great we can be and all that kind of stuff. Neighboring is inconvenient. We've all had neighbors start up conversations at all the wrong times. Anybody? You only have a half an hour to cut that grass, but somebody stops by and starts talking to you for 20 minutes. It's like, no. Oh. Or that neighbor needs help at the most inopportune time. Like, we've all been there. I'm guilty of ducking behind a vehicle or possibly pretending to talk on my phone in order to not get caught up in it. Don't you judge me. Don't you do it. But in order to neighbor your community, you got to spend time with your neighbors. You got to talk with people. You have to be with your neighbors, listening to the needs of the community. Jesus' ministry was in the neighborhood. He was out in the streets. He was at homes. He was certainly at synagogues as well. But they were actually more like community centers. Jesus demonstrated what being a neighbor is. And at the heart of the gospel, neighboring is key. We have to be careful of the trap of the church bubble, where all we do and all we surround ourselves with are Christians. It's kind of difficult to see people come into Christ if we're solely expecting that they're just going to randomly show up at church one day. Now, God's given you a voice. He's given you a life to express the love of Jesus Christ to the world around us. It's hard for God to use us in this life-changing work of the gospel if we're not sharing about how good God is and how he's changed our life and what he's saved us from. We got to build margin to our lives to neighbor people. Will I be a neighbor? Will I be a good neighbor in the community of which God has placed me in? There really was nothing entertaining about Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. You notice that? Nothing entertaining at all. There was nothing, in fact, it was not fast-paced at all, and it had a very low budget. Very low. Nothing about the show would suggest that it could last for over 30 years on television, but it did. It was very slow-paced, with Mr. Rogers moving about slowly, talking very slowly, doing things completely opposite than the fast-paced world that we live in. But it was all intentional. He intentionally did this because he knew that hurry and busyness do not communicate love. And just as Jesus told the story of those two very religious leaders having no time for the man who was beaten up, half dead on the side of the road, in the story that we know of the Good Samaritan, today we have to ask that same question. Do I have time for the practical needs of the people around me? Do I make time? Do I have time to share the life-saving message of the good news of Jesus to the people that surround my life? Or am I only focused on me, my church bubble? Am I focused on my relationships in the church, what I get out of church? Or am I just focused on me, how much Bible knowledge I know, how free I am in Christ, how gifted I am? Use those to give out to people that don't know him. Because it can easily be consumerism Christianity, not Great Commission Christianity, if our focus becomes us and not the world. Because the church exists for the world. That's great. Jesus' Great Commission. And hurry is the enemy of opportunity. It's really hard to love somebody if you're hurried all the time through life. Do you ever prayerfully plan opportunity into your day? I know how my morning prayers start, and I don't often give God that opportunity. God, show me somebody. God, who can I reach out to? God, give me a door to knock on, to just share the love of Christ with somebody that maybe I'll bump into here today. Are we so hurried in life that the practical needs of those around us might not be worthy of our time, just like that Levite, just like that priest that walked on the other side of the road and that guy that was beaten up and in a ditch? I'm not convinced that church is going to be the same as it was years ago, with the majority of our nation believing in God and making him a greater priority. I think we have to grieve that. Unfortunately, we live in a post-Christian society. It's unfortunately the truth. We have to take time to grieve that. Because we don't take the time to grieve, we carry a lot of things along the way. And think about Israel when they were captured by Babylon and they were brought in and everybody was crying out to God, God, how could this happen? Even though God sent people to say, this is why it's happening and you better turn and repent and all those types of things. But yet they went and they were like, God, get us out of here. And he sent Jeremiah the prophet. He said, no, I want you to tell them, seek for the peace of the city that you live in. Seek for the welfare of the city that you live in. Don't just try to get out all the time. No, you gotta change things from the inside out there. You gotta start seeking for the peace. The gospel of peace can transform a community. That's why he puts us in the communities that he's placed us in. Church has to adapt its vision today to being a very integral neighbor in the community in which God's placed us. To meet people, flesh and blood, not just on church on Sunday morning. Maybe instead of us planning another Bible study, God's calling some people to coach and serve youth sports in our community. Because you actually spend time and you can be an example of a godly person to kids that might never have seen that before. Maybe instead of having just to be all about our life group and my life group, and God wants you to spend time hosting an addiction ministry, or God's asking you to help serve teenagers or children. Maybe it means giving up spending all of our extra time and what we want to do all the time, and it means reaching somebody in your neighborhood with help. You know, there's a lot of leaves falling these days. Who could you help rake up their leaves? Who could you meet and eat with? Who could you regularly build a relationship with around you? How many lost people do we regularly build a relationship with? Jesus did just that. Remember when Jesus was leaving Jericho, and there's a story about a blind man that starts crying out to him. This story is found in Mark chapter 10. And at the end of it, and it starts in verse 46, and it says, they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples, a great crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus stopped and said, call him. They called the blind man, saying to him, take heart, get up, he's calling you. And throwing off his cloak. Anytime somebody puts on a cloak or takes off a cloak in scriptures, it's very significant. This is setting up the story to see how his old nature was being shed. The beggar's cloak was being taken off. They knew him to be a beggar. You know, they used to issue actual beggars' cloaks back in the day. Because many people would just sit by the roadside. They'd realize, oh, this is an easy way to make a couple bucks, and they'd just start begging. The government back then would actually issue beggars' cloaks to who were legitimate beggars who were in great need. So they had a cloak about him, a certain cloak and how it looked, and people would know that this is actually a beggar. And so he threw that cloak off. It wasn't going to define him anymore. The old nature is coming off, and now Jesus is going to put on the new nature, a new cloak, new garbs for him, called salvation. Story goes on. Jesus said to him, what do you want me to do for you? And the blind man said to him, Rabbi, let me recover my sight. And Jesus said to him, go your way, your faith has made you well. And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him on the way. Notice Jesus said you can go on your way, but it ends with Bartimaeus going on the way. Bartimaeus didn't just take the healing and go. He didn't just take what Jesus could give him and go the other way. There was something happening in his life. Bartimaeus said, Son of David. He knew who Jesus was. He couldn't see him with his eyes, but he knew who this was in his heart, that this was the Messiah, and he was crying out for him in his need that day. Have mercy on me. Everybody told him to shut up, Bartimaeus. But he started yelling louder and louder, have mercy upon me. How many people are crying out, have mercy on me, God? Every single one of us has a past. Every single one of us has stuff that we are not proud of. Every single one of us has shame. We got this stuff in our lives. And we know where to go for the mercy that we need, because that stuff can be pretty weighty in our lives. It can weigh us down. It can take us out. It really can. Christianity is not just some entitled position. It's a call to serve the marginalized, the pushed aside, those that are in the ditch. Serving the least of these is the condition of how God will one day judge our lives. And if we go that day when we're standing before the throne of God and God's asking us the question, why? Why didn't you reach out to Johnny? I put him right there in your path. You didn't share about me. Why didn't you do that? And we just look at God and say, well, I didn't feel led. God's going to be like, you didn't feel what? You didn't feel led, but I commanded you to go and tell the world about me. Well, I didn't feel led. Well, put a pencil in your pocket wherever you go and start feeling led every single day of your life, okay? Because he's called us to share to everybody. And that's why we do things. That's why as a church we do things like that. Ring the Salvation Army in the month of December. The money that we raise by standing at the local supermarket goes back into helping out those in our community with food and clothing, other practical needs, stays right here. Maybe God's impressing you to take a shift or two. Can we do that? Can we be neighbors to our community? Can we be light out there? Because, sometimes we can be all the light we want to be in here. But guess what? Who's seeing that? The crowd will always tell you that the vision does not have time for the community, the world, the lost, for the interruption. Sometimes as church people, of which I am a church person, I've grown up in the church all my life. But even church people, we can tell you, we want to do this kind of for us, and we kind of make decisions for what's comfortable for us and what we want to do in our relationships with Jesus, saying, no, it's out there. And Jesus, he called Bartimaeus to himself, and as a result, we find that Jesus silenced the shamers by loving the sinner. He silenced the crowd by his simple act of love. And to Jesus, the value of a person is greater than the price of their failure or their condition or their worth to society. Romans 5:8 says, but God shows his love for us that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. It was when we were sinners that he died for us. It was when we were in the worst of the worst. But somewhere along the way, it seems there can be a real tension that begins to happen between the church and the vision to reach the unchurched, because we want to do our thing. We want to be filled up ourselves, but God only fills us so that it's poured out on others. In our story, the crowd tried to quiet the need of a man who did not fit their mold, a man whose life was loud and distracting. I've often wondered if Jesus stopped because of the blind man's cries, or because Jesus wanted to quiet the crowd himself by what he was about to do. At the beginning of 2020, we planted a second church. We call it our neighborhood church. It's right down the street from our community garden that was in operation for about 7 years. And in the beginning, there was a little bit of resistance to the vision. Not because people were being heartless, because often our vision, though, was not for the unchurched. We've got a church. Why? We can do things instead of going to where people are. I heard some interesting things about the type of people that we might reach there. Say, what? Jesus reached everyone. Everyone. Don't tell me about the type of people. I don't want to hear that. And I will have problems with that. Jesus came salvation for everybody. That's his goal. That's what he wants. That's his desire. And as a leader and as a pastor, sometimes one of my jobs is to consistently challenge the inward focus of the church. If our focus is just inward all the time, then nothing grows, including your faith. Because faith in Christ grows when God is transforming the lives of people. And you know what? There's been a lot of us that have been transformed for a long time, but haven't done anything with that transformation. He transforms us so that he can use us as vessels of transformation in others. We planted this church not to have a secondary campus, but to be neighbors. Now, 2020 wasn't the best year to plant a church. It's been up and down, but you know what? It's been pretty consistent as of late, and it's been a blessing to see what God's doing. But you know, even through the pandemic, because we were present in the neighborhood, we passed out hundreds of boxes of food. We were able to have discussions about racial reconciliation that we probably wouldn't have had an into before. Our community garden was filled with people wanting to be involved in their own neighborhood. I mean, filled. Best year ever. Only because we were there. And whether or not they step in the church doors, people know that we care for them. We're not really focused on church growth, but trying to neighbor our neighborhood. And that's two very different dispositions. That's why we're doing the Christmas market this year. Maybe you haven't heard about it, or maybe you don't know too much about it. I'm super excited about this. Our team is like pretty pumped. Like, you know, we love Christmas because it's Jesus. I mean, it's a holiday, yeah, but it's about Jesus, right? And on December 11th, we will be hosting a Christmas market. It's kind of like this old school European style market where we've got all these artists and crafters coming in and food vendors. And we want it to be like a special time out in our community where we can kind of gather together and remember what Christmas is all about. We're going to have a nickel market where we got snacks and drinks for 5 cents. Nickel, hence the term, nickel, 5 cents. We're going to be, practically giving those away, right? And we're gonna have a petting zoo for the kids. It's going to be awesome. Ben wants to ride a pony. We're going to have pony races. Ben and I are going to have pony races. No, but it's gonna be awesome, and we're gonna have our adventure kids do like a Christmas carol thing there. Like it's gonna be out there, sharing and shining the love of Jesus. And it takes all of us to do that. I want to encourage you, church, get behind this vision. Be a part, come a part of it. Just help out. We need teams of people that help with safety, with setup, tear down, the nickel market, all these different things. We need help in those areas. Come and be a part of it. Give of yourself. Be a neighbor in that way. Tell people about it. Share it on social media. Invite people to come on out to it, because that's what makes it fun. That's what makes it an opportunity to share the love of Jesus with people. We want it to be an avenue to invite people to Christmas Eve service where, Christmas. Yeah, Christmas Eve. Oh, yeah, we can worship Jesus on Christmas and Christmas Eve? Yeah, let's do that, because that's what it's about, right? I think there's a lot of people out there, they're just waiting to be invited, to be honest. A lot of people are crying out for mercy in their lives today, whether they realize it or not, whether we do or not. A lot of people in these days feeling the weight of their sin. They don't even quite understand it. A lot of people are looking for salvation and freedom that can only come from Jesus Christ. When blind Bartimaeus approached, Jesus asked him a question. What do you want me to do for you, he says. And that needs to be the question. That's what we have to start asking. Ask the question instead of give the opinion. We're so quick to give the opinion. Jesus knew that this man was blind. He did not need Bartimaeus to tell him what his need was. But Jesus wasn't going to assume, because Jesus lived with dignity and he placed dignity on people. And he said, what do you need help with, Bartimaeus? How can I help you? What if we did that? Jesus knew that he needed salvation too, but instead of telling him that or quieting him down or preaching a sermon to him, Jesus gave him something that he was in desperate need of, his sight. And then afterwards, after he asked the question, allowed him to give voice to the condition, after that, he helped him even more. He helped him to see with spiritual eyes. And with that, God does that in our lives. And he's calling us to ask those questions. There's a story that I recently heard of a dad, and he's kind of a hillbilly. He had 4 big sons, all over 6 feet tall. And one day he calls all his boys to him. He said, boys, I got to ask you a question, and I want to know who's done this. Who threw the outhouse into the river? All the boys kind of just looked down, kind of doing one of these, and, trying to just be quiet. They didn't want to say anything, He's like, boys, listen, I'm going to tell you a story of George Washington. Now, George Washington, one day he cut down his daddy's cherry tree. His daddy came home. Daddy saw it. Came out to George, said, George, do you know anything about this cherry tree? George told the truth. Said, Daddy, I cut down the cherry tree. And Dad said, because you told the truth, I'm not going to give you a whooping today. Now, boys, I need somebody to tell me the truth. Who threw the outhouse into the river? Finally, the second oldest son it was me, Daddy. I did it. So thank you, son, for telling the truth. Now come with me. Grabbed him by the arm, brought him down to the woodshed, and gave him a big old whooping. The boy looked up afterwards like, Daddy, you told me the story about how George Washington's daddy didn't give him a whooping after he told the truth. Why did you do it to me? And Daddy just looked at him and said, son, the difference between George Washington's dad and myself was he was not in the cherry tree at the time where it was cut down. Man, talk about a new form of a bidet. I'm telling you. But listen, what was the point? The dad is trying to get his sons to tell the truth. And I think our Heavenly Father is just simply wanting us to tell the truth about who his son is. I think God the Father just really wants us to tell the truth of what Jesus has done in our own lives. Has Jesus done something in your life? Has he transformed you? Were you like this at one point and he's transformed your life over time, or maybe in a moment, or maybe drastically, where God has just delivered you, set you free, just saved you, washed you up, whatever it might be? Has God done something in your life where you're now different? He wants you to tell the truth of what Jesus has done in you. He's calling you to do that. He's calling you to. Paul, he was so ecstatic. Paul was, he said he was the chief of sinners. But yet Paul writes in Romans 1, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it's the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and then to the Gentile. For in the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. Listen, it's not how good you can tell about Jesus or how much you know. It's what Jesus has done in your life. Because the gospel is powerful. It can stand on itself. If you talk about Jesus, it's not up to you to save somebody. It's up to the power of the Holy Spirit to do that. But you're called to open your mouth. You're called to open your mouth. Not only that, the gospel is for salvation, meaning it saved us from a dead life. A life of dead religion, a life of dead works. It also saves us from hell, because hell's a reality. It's a place. We don't like to talk about that. We don't like that, but it's real. Now just imagine if your neighbor was walking out on the road and a semi was coming along and was going to hit him. You'd just be like, oh, feel bad for that guy. No, you would be shouting, get out of the way, get out of the way. But yet, we know this truth and we know the love of God. And we're not telling people to get out of the way of that semi. We're not telling people about how they can have a relationship with God and be saved for eternity. The gospel is for everyone. Red, yellow, black, and white. We're all precious in his sight. It's for sinners, it's for saints, it's even for your siblings. You can tell them about what Jesus did for you. Everywhere Jesus went, he shared about how people could have a relationship with his Father. He was doing that with Bartimaeus. Bartimaeus could have went on his own way, but he went on the way with Jesus. And the conclusion of this story, that Bartimaeus started following Jesus down that road. What do you think Jesus was telling Bartimaeus? There's a lot more than your physical sight that I want to give you. I want you to start seeing spiritually now. I'm going to change you from the inside out. And from this experience, from him going over and reaching into the ditch and pulling Bartimaeus out of this place in his life, from being a beggar to now a child in the kingdom of God, Jesus met a need and he won a friend. Bartimaeus was going along that way with Jesus. They're now boys. Bartimaeus loves this guy. He barely knows him, but he's changed his life. Yeah, he's given him his sight, but there's so much more because God was already stirring Bartimaeus before Jesus walked down that road. The quickest way to the heart of people, to the heart of our neighbors, to the heart of our neighborhoods, to our communities, is just lending a hand. How can we be not only the voice of Christ, but how can we be the hands of Christ? Now, I know we don't know all the stories in the Gospels of where miracles took place, but I recently went through and I did a loose count of where Jesus ministered to people. I counted well over 100 times Jesus ministering in the community, and just about 10 times where he ministered in the synagogue. He was out in the neighborhoods over 1,100% more than he was in the church. That's where he was reaching people. That's where he was seeing heaven touch earth. Now, I'm not saying we don't do that in the church and that we have that. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that maybe God wants to reach people. Maybe heaven wants to touch people outside of this place as well. Jesus, his focus was the one. Bartimaeus that day, not the crowds, but the one. And I believe that God is calling us, you and me, church, in this time, to have a vision for the one. Who is your one? Who's your Bartimaeus? Who are you reaching with the love of Jesus Christ? It takes a change of thinking. Not what I can get, what I can do, who can minister to me all the time. No. Who is your one? Who is off on the side of the road that needs your help? Maybe that's an opportunity. Maybe that's a door that God has called you to walk through. Dignity is the door to influence. Jesus influenced people. His love for people was so great. It was just pouring out of his life because he cared about where they're at. Not how inconvenient it was going to be. We've got to have high road thinking. High road thinking is thinking of others higher than you've been thought of yourself. Because he's given us a commission. He's given us an opportunity to share of heaven's goodness to the world around us. But we've got to have a heart, we've got to have a vision, we've got to have a mindset for the one. Who is that person? I'd like to end by just everybody standing up right now and simply asking God a question. God, who is my one? I want you to ask that to the Lord. Just pray that in your seats. Who is my Bartimaeus? Who are you asking me to lend a hand to reach out to start walking with me, to start sharing about you? Start sharing about you. You know, people get kind of, it's like it's too hard to share about Jesus. You know, I can't do it. You know, you can. Because if he's done something in you, all you have to do is share what he's done in you. Think about the word salt. Start a conversation. Ask a question. Listen to their answer. And then tell your story. That's it. Start a conversation. Ask a question. Listen to what they say. And then tell your story about how Jesus has changed your life. If he's done something in you, he can do something in that person that he's calling you to love on, to be their neighbor. Who is your one? Who is your Bartimaeus? I want you to consider that today. Let's pray. Jesus, I thank you that you show us what it looks like to stop the craziness of our lives and our own agendas and our own roads that we're walking down. And God, turn aside to that person that is in need, that person that is in desperate need of your mercy. God, let us not be like the Levite or the priest that walked on the other side of the road, but let us be like that Good Samaritan, as Jesus demonstrated that, as Jesus answered, who is my neighbor? Is there anybody and everybody around that is in flesh and blood, that needs the good news of Jesus Christ, that needs the salvation from sin, death, and hell? God, let us have a heart for the one. God, give us a holy courage to not be shocked by the sinners of this world. Because sinners sin. It's like hate is gonna hate, sin is gonna sin. Let's not be shocked by it. Let us not be ashamed of your name too, Father. Let us not be afraid to share of the good news and the goodness of God in our lives. Lord, I pray for a holy courage, a joyful courage to share of the goodness of God to the people that are around us. That's what being a neighbor is all about. Help us to be your definition of who and what a neighbor is today. And if there's somebody in the sound of my voice today that does not know you, Jesus, it's very simple. You call upon his name, you ask him to forgive you of the sins of your life, and you start walking on the way with him, just like Bartimaeus did. Just like Bartimaeus did. He might be calling you right now. You just call upon his name, Jesus. Be happy to talk with you about that further. You know, we'd be happy to pray with you too. We're gonna have a time when we open up our altar just for prayer ministry. Everybody needs prayer every once in a while. Whether you need healing from God, whether there's a financial issue, whether there's a job issue, whether there's just stuff going awry in your life, or maybe God's just calling you or choosing to speak something to you. You just want prayer and confirmation. Man, that's this time right now. So we're gonna do that right now. Well, let's love God right now in this moment so that he fills us up so that we can love our neighbors. Amen? Amen. Let's take a couple minutes to worship the Lord together.